Welcome everyone to another Invisible Architecture interview. I'm Carol Asa, and my guest today is Richard Creightmore, who is an acupuncturist for people and also for the land. He's well known for all of this. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Carol.
Wow, it just done so much research on all of this. It actually gone out and done the work on all of this geomancy, you know?
Yeah.
I keep hearing so many people at these dowsing conferences and they all talk about it, but you really have put in the actual work.
I've been at it 45 years now.
Exactly, and incorporated it with Feng Shui, which is so important because they're one in this, you know, it's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of it.
So maybe when we're going to start here, you could like give your definition of what geomancy is, because that's, you know, you're an acupuncturist and a geomantist, right?
Okay. There's been a narrower definition of geomancy for the last 300 or 400 years, which is a discrete divinatory system using 16 figures derived from either poking holes in the sand with a stick.
Oh, that one. Okay. Yeah.
So that for a few centuries, that's been what geomancy has meant, certainly in Europe. And round about the end of the 1960s, some of the books by writers like John Michel started coming out, and they broadened the definition of geomancy to include the whole range of earth mysteries, and sacred space design, archaeoastronomy, dowsing.
A lot.
And of course, the different cultural variants, the different cultural traditions of geomancy, from Feng Shui to Vastu to traditions from all over the world. There's their geomantic traditions. And they're even tucked away behind Christianity and Islam in the design of churches, the design of mosques, design of Buddhist stupas, and so on. The geomantic principles.
So I know, so I read, because I just followed your work through the years and things. So you do go out with the geomancy and actually find the grid lines and the water veins and the ley lines and all of that. And I've seen that when you're talking about Washington, D.C., looking at the geomancy of Washington, D.C., if we may start at this moment, that you found that it's laid out so perfectly geometrically and everything, but it didn't follow the earth lines. You want to get into that a little bit?
I have to say that secondhand news, I've never been to Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay, but others have said it.
Others have been, and this is what I've heard from other dowsers who've been there.
And so have you been at any other cities that have you found that it's just like, it's like it hasn't been anchored, right?
Yeah, I've been to Canberra and found that it is much more anchored, and part of Burley Griffiths' original design for Canberra was similar Masonic and astronomic principles as Washington. But he also bothered to ask the locals about the real Earth energy power spots and incorporated those in his design. Oh,
okay. So that's good. So like when you're doing geomancy, one of the big topics are the grids, the Cartman grid, the Curry grid. So do you want to get into the grids a bit? Because some of the people might not know them and what they are.
Yeah, there's a whole series of global geomagnetic grids that dowsers are finding more and more. The Hartmann grid and the Curry grid were discovered by a couple of German dowsers in the 1950s and 60s, named after them. And they are taken extremely seriously, especially in France and Germany, in my experience. There's relatively little attention paid to the global grids in Britain at the moment, and I haven't found a huge amount of material on them. There are a couple of books. And there was definitely a phase in the 80s when any dowser in Britain worth their salt, or in the continent for that matter, or in the European continent, was finding a new grid and giving it their name.
I remember like with the Hartmann, because I also like graduated from the biogeometry, so they're really on the grid things also, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
remember the Hartmann grids, which go north, south, east, west. In Germany, that they said, now I don't know if this is true, that you couldn't get a builder's permit if it hadn't been checked for Hartmann because it was so corresponded to cancer.
Yeah. The Hartmann grid is definitely one of the big issues. Underground water veins that are carrying distressed information is probably the biggest one for cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I do relatively little work with the Hartmann and Curry grid because I started out working, cleaning up the information fields, the energy fields of underground water veins, which is very much the foundation of geopathic stress work for me as I've evolved in practice. And I discovered that any stress held in the Hartmann or the Curry grids particularly would resolve as stress in the underground water veins resolved.
Oh, okay. Because the stress a lot of times happens when the east, west, and north, south for the Hartmann, where they intersect, right?
Yeah, where there's landscape trauma, then there will be stress potentially in any of the earth energies, particularly the underground water veins and the lays and the Curry and Hartmann grids. I think probably the Curry grid has got a strong relationship with ground voltage.
Oh.
You know, the way our AC wired houses work, the return is through the earth. So we're charging up the earth with voltage all the time as well.
It gets worse. But the Curry are the northeast, southwest, the half cardinals, right? It runs a diagonal.
They're on the diagonal, and the current thinking is that they derive ultimately from just the rotation of the Earth generating electromagnetic field.
Oh,
on different octaves, different wavelengths, and the most minute of these was the Curry and Hartmann, are only a couple of yards wide.
Mm-hmm. But I've
say,
seen in something when you were talking somewhere, you were talking about cats, like and feline cancer.
Yeah, the feline leukemia, particularly. This is just a working thesis that seems to correspond especially with the Curry grid, which can soak up electromagnetic stress. And because there's a well-established link between electromagnetic stress in general and leukemias and lymphomas, I found myself wondering whether the feline leukemia outbreak in North America that I heard about 20 years ago, I don't know how it's doing now, had any relationship to it, because we know cats love to go for geopathic stress hotspots to make their nests.
Well, I was wondering, like, when you're looking at this, like just going back in the day too, like with these grids, because the Chinese, you know, aligned a lot. Well, they used it with their bagua gets along with these, and even like putting them in the walls and things. But I was wondering if you saw more that mammals and humans aligned more with the Hartmann grid, and then like insects and bees and things with the Curry. Did you see and cats?
I can't say I've noticed that particularly, but I have to say my main focus as a jobbing geomancer over the last 40 years has been the water lines and the lays.
Okay.
I can sort those out. The local grids tend to sort themselves out.
Okay.
Occasionally, I might want to put a permanent standing stone or a permanent stone cairn or something on a particularly strong negative Hartmann or Curry geopathogenic node. But I'm interested to learn more.
The one thing, just for a little more on the grids, I was interested. There's one called the cemetery grid that is a northeast southwest, and I was wondering if that's been found many times or if that's what it is.
I took that from a couple of fabulous articles in the British Society of Dowsers Journal by Dr. Gunther Schneck, who's an old dowser who lives in the west of Britain. He went off exploring beyond the Curry and Hartmann that are about 2 yards wide, more or less. He found a hole that were between 100 and 200 yards wide, which is probably the next octave up in the
oh, I see.
in the wavelengths of the electromagnetic field generated by the dynamo of the Earth spinning. and he went off exploring and discovered different relationships. One of the grids got a strong relationship with heart chakras.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking like even like when you're on the Bagua, the northeast is looked at as the doorway of spirit, and the southwest is the doorway of humanity. And it just was kind of interesting. They would be set up on those diagonal lines from, because Masonic temples are set up that way too.
Yeah. The various other grids, and there's a nice nesting hierarchy of one grid where the positive crossing points relate to good heart chakra spots, shrines, shrines and holy wells and those sorts of things. Another grid relates to the throat chakra, and Schneck found repeatedly pulpits and lecterns and monastery lecterns and so on.
So it's just been refined.
Refined. Another one corresponding with the brow chakra that he found again and again at the site of communion rails in a church.
Okay.
And he called the cemetery grid because he found it aligned repeatedly with either the old traditional corpse roads, the old coffin paths across the country.
Oh, okay.
Or also with a particular door that in some churches is the door that's used for carrying coffins in and out.
And it just goes along with the Chinese. Oh, that's so good.
Also to the entry point of catacombs, the portals into cemeteries and so on. When I discovered this lot, this was in the mid-90s, he published this. I went out exploring them all, and discovered in grid that my experience of finding a positive cemetery grid node, in other words, a crossing of two of the lines, was like a portal to angelic realms.
Wow. That's interesting, because I go to Forest Lawn Cemetery every week because they have a sharp labyrinth, and it's beautiful on a hill overlooking, and so I have to check it. I hadn't thought of that before. I was looking, and saw that cemetery grid, so to see if it works out, because a lot of the labyrinths are also aligned that way.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it just goes on and on, right?
Yeah.
So
that little series, there's another one as well that relates to solar plexus chakra that I haven't really dowsed much to check, but I suspect it might correspond with the entrance to shopping malls.
Okay, so then let's get into, so those are the grids that are around in there.
There's also the mirror image. I mean, all those grids that Schneck described are between 60 and 120 degrees east of north as their primary alignment. And then so they take that diagonal. But he found a whole series of mirror image negative grids where the crossing points have kind of equal and opposite effects.
Wow.
If you go to a negative throat chakra spot, then your throat just clamps up and you can't sing, or you can't sing in tune. If you go to a negative heart chakra point, it corresponds with condemned prisoner cells and the sites of old gibbets.
This has really gotten intricate.
And he described the mirror image to the cemetery grid as denotes something very unpleasant. Without going any further. And I had a look at one that I discovered, and I spent about 20 seconds in it and decided it was a corresponding opposite portal to demonic realms.
So then there's the world grid, like what's their names? Hagen,
the Becker
Hagen.
Yeah,
so that's different, right?
That's different. On the macro scale, we've got fundamentally the 5 platonic solids. As it was explained once a long time to me by a wise old man called Stanley Messenger. He said, imagine the 5 platonic solids imposed within a perfect sphere, and where the edge lines and where the nodes touch the surface of the sphere, that's where you get the primal power spots, the primal geometrical power spots, and the primal energy lines, primal grid lines. Since then, of course, the Earth isn't a perfect sphere, but also we've had continental drift, we've had tectonic movement, So it's not so easy to plot a perfect geometry in terms of reality
But when
nowadays.
I'm looking at those lines are more curved. I mean, because of the Earth, they're not so linear like the Hartman and Curry.
Yeah, which presumably are curved if you take the macro view over the whole of the planet.
Right. But looking at the globe one, it's more like the net. It's like a net, like the netters, like Egyptian, like creating that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into the ley lines and the water now, because that's your specialty there.
Yeah. You mentioning Egypt just reminded me of one more really interesting thing. Blanche Metz did some fabulous work.
Oh, I have a book. Yeah.
You have her book. Yeah, and I find it fascinating the notion that she found that Himalayan stupas and Egyptian temples had their Hartman grid lines pushed outside, so there was none running within the sacred space.
Right.
And she also found that some secular homes in the Himalayas had the same effect, which she tracked down to a local building tradition of the bricklayer tapping one end of each brick before it gets laid to set up a little magnetic polarity, north-south, north-south, north-south with each brick. So that the building of a home like that effectively creates the sacred space and keeps the Hartman grid lines out. And they all stack up as quite a strong boundary on the outside edge of the sacred structure.
I think I'll read her book again. I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
There was so much wisdom in that book.
Yeah, so much wisdom. And I listened to the talk from a lovely old English dowser who's long gone now. Once he talked about, armed with this book, he went off to explore some of the British cathedrals, and he discovered one cathedral, I forget which one now, that had an extension put on it about 150 years ago. And he found that the original cathedral, similarly, didn't have the Hartman grid lines running within it. They'd all been pushed outside. But the modern extension, they were running through it. And as he disarmingly put it, so I just pushed them out.
Oh, okay. There's a good one. Yeah, there was so much knowledge, wisdom back then, and now there's just nothing. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, because I know some of these people, they went looking for spiritual, this is like years ago, but looking for spiritual sites around Israel and all that area and the Middle East. And they found like that were the churches and temples and synagogues and stuff, the old ones, it's all banks and things now, you know what I mean? They commandeered them. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also a story that one particular high street bank in England is always to be found on one of the main lays in that high street. But then lays and lay crossings are associated with places of power, not just spiritual power, but also nuclear power stations and power stations, and the town hall or the imperial palace, or the chieftain's hut.
Okay.
So power, spiritual and temporal, finds its way to the lays and the lay crossings.
Do you want to describe for the viewers what lay is?
Okay. There's a kind of broad to people who haven't gone deeply into geomancy. Ley line in Britain is just a broad term to represent earth energies. There's at the moment a movement to reclaim ley as the proper word, with the assumption that ley line is actually a tautology, because a ley is a line. So you'll hear about lays rather than ley lines.
Well, I thought ley meant light. Does it mean light? Line?
Ley originally means line, according to Alfred Watkins' use of the word. And he coined the term just because of the number of place names with ley in them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which probably originally means a grassy meadow rather than even a line, but he used it in the sense of a line.
Right.
So there are a number of different earth energies you can dowse. My working definition, and broadly speaking, the broad working definition of most English dowsers nowadays, is that a ley can be distinguished from other types of earth energy line you can dowse because it has a triple fold anatomy. It has a central spirit midline and a pair of male and female currents that wind around it like the snakes around the caduceus. Excuse me. So if you find a line that seems to have five, or your dowsing rods twitch 5 times, one for each of the outside edges, and then once each for a current on one side and a current on the other side, and then a 5th time for the central spirit midline, then that would be a lay. And again, I've heard recently that dowsers are finding more and more lays.
You know what? I used to get like Paul Devereaux's, you know, the lay hunter and all of that.
Yeah.
And I remember when he came out and made the proclamation that all lays are man-made. But then there was the whole thing where they come down from heaven, go across, and then go into the earth. So how do you see lays working?
I'm sure I don't have a full picture of what lays are. Certainly some of them describe great circles all the way around the world.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them seem to come down from the sky, run a few hundred miles, and then go down into the earth.
Right.
The lays that we knew about from the 70s, or even the 1920s, are all associated with a series of sacred sites along them. But increasingly, people are finding earth energies that dowsers a lay, but might only be 10 yards wide.
Okay.
And aren't picked up by anything significant in terms of land use in the landscape along their path. They're not marked by the traditional dew ponds and wayside crosses and churches and chapels and stone circles and barrows and things. But they certainly dowsers lays, and if they're in trouble, they're worth attending to as part of cleaning up the earth energies of the site. You know, quite why the lays are becoming more and more obvious at the moment. Excuse me, it's part.
Just take a minute. Well, look at your standing stone circle behind you there. The nice one.
Yeah, this is something that a dear old friend Ivan Macbeth helped us build about 24 years ago.
So it's actually yours?
Yeah, it's in our back field.
Oh, okay. That's great. So when you're doing the lays now, I know that you use the stakes for acupuncture and things like. Can you talk about when you're working with lays and water, how you go about that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the ideal way to work a lay and the traditional way to work a lay is to put a sacred site on it and do magico-religious ceremonial in there. To maintain the spiritual hygiene of the local earth energy network, not just the lays, but the water lines running from that parish church to the rest of the parish, or from that stone circle to the surrounding landscape.
Okay.
So this is our traditional usage. Lays the big lays seem to define where we bother to build a church or a cathedral or a stone circle.
So I see. So what you're saying, so this is the difference between what Devereaux was saying, is that they already know the lay exists and they put it as a power splat on it. It's not created afterwards from people walking to them, between them.
Yeah, I think so, either intuitively or serendipitously or very consciously.
Yeah.
And there's certainly evidence that the stonemason tradition has held alive the knowledge of dowsing earth energies for probably a couple of 100 years longer than the Freemason tradition has.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ability to define where a good spot to build the church is partly from dowsing, but on another level, I go to a good number of New Age festivals every year in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I get to douse the site before the setup and suggest where the best place for the central ceremonial hearth fire should be.
Mm-hmm.
But more often than not these days, people have intuitively decided, without being dowsers necessarily, to put the central altar hearth, the community hearth fire, in exactly the right spot. more or less in the middle of the field, but on the big lay crossing in that field.
Oh, okay.
So there's serendipity and intuition involved too.
Yeah.
And the same applies actually with the crop circles. You've been having crop circles in North America for I don't know how many millennia, but certainly that they come and go here. And in the 1970s and 1980s, they started happening a lot. And then human teams went out and started making lots of them as well.
I know. Yeah, they're always like exposing this.
Yeah, so on the one hand, the best of the channel guidance I've encountered for who's making the crop circles seems to be a coalition of extraterrestrial races that have an investment in the spiritual evolution of life on Earth, or humanity on Earth. And there are a number of particular races who crop up again and again, with some interaction with the local Devic landscape spirits and perhaps the whites, the spirits of especially Neolithic sacred sites. But then in the 1980s, lots of human teams started making them as well. And I happened to have a chat after giving a talk about the history of crop circles, because they go back in Zulu tradition to a good 3,000 years. They go back in English written tradition back to the 1500s. So I did a talk at a festival one day, and a couple came up to me afterwards and said, that was fascinating. We lead one of the 8 teams making crop circles in Wiltshire these days, and we had no idea of the long history and that real ones exist as well, rather than just the man-made ones that we know.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I happened to have visited some of the crop circles they claim to have made that summer, and dowsed them, and discovered that just like the real ones, for want of a better term, they were placed unerringly on the crossing point of the biggest lay with the biggest underground stream in any particular field.
Isn't that amazing that intuitively they knew that, or do you think they dowsed it?
I asked them if they dowsed it and said, no, we don't have a dowser. Our geometer receives what the design should be and more or less where it should be when we get to the edge of the field. We throw our hands up, ask for our feet to be guided to the center spot, and just walk there, and then know when they've got there.
Well, thank God. I mean, it could be going another direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're really like, with those, you're really tuning the earth, Really
tuning, yeah. And the real crop circles are plainly a great big tune-up of the earth.
It was interesting. In my last interview, I had Angela T. Smith, who's a big remote viewer. She had worked with the government and, Stanford, all this stuff. And she was tasked to interview, to get information about the aliens. I just wanted to be this little, but so anyhow, she decided she didn't want to get involved with them. So she made an interview. So she had an interview with the different ones, and she was able to find 20 different ones. So I thought that was interesting, like, like acknowledging, like, yeah.
That's also a figure I've heard, acknowledged contact with 20 different extraterrestrial races, according to MI20, which is the British Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. I don't know. I don't know the truth of that, but that's something I.
But it's the same. It's the same, and it's maybe the same people working this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So these crop circle makers considered that they were also doing a blessing on the land by creating a beautiful geometry and putting it just there, and they were definitely. They don't have the oomph of one of the real crop circles, but there's definitely a sweetness and a desire to interact and provide a blessing on the land to help raise the spiritual hygiene of the earth energy network, the lays and the underground water veins, cleaning up their information field and through them into the grids.
So some of these are so intricate to think that people make them. I mean, do they have devices they go out there with? And
they're using laser tape measures. And,
I see, laser stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and ropes and bending the stalks by hand. They were telling me, but still the experience of going in a man-made one, especially a fresh one that's within about 3 weeks of it arriving, is tiny compared with going in a real one. I used to visit them in the 1980s where I was warned off them.
And do these crop circles, do they attract water lines, veins?
They seem to be sited on the crossing of the biggest underground stream with the biggest ley in that field.
Oh, okay.
Which is just the same image, actually, as the sighting of a European church, where there will be the water dome or the blind spring underneath the altar, and the ley running up the nave. And so where the two of them meet at the altar, that's the Holy Communion between the heavenly energy of the ley and the goddess energy of the water dome, the rising water energy.
You have the Black Madonna and the other Madonna, like right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, aligned with that.
Yeah. So when you get the heaven principle and the earth principle coming in union, then you get the child.
Right.
Become known as the Christ child in the last couple of hundred years, not a couple of thousand years.
It's so good. Like, and then the church they would call like the line between the pews. It would be the river of Jericho, that it would just flow out. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it would be great, because a lot of the churches they find, I know M.A, who did all that research and stuff, he found like water lines directly under all of the churches, and he went and cathedrals.
Yeah, especially blind springs, as we know them in Britain, or water domes in America. Houses that will be rising underneath any decent church altar. And of course, a water line or a crossing of two streams under the font as well. And then all sorts of associated spirals, spiral forms that you can dowse in relation to weather or water domes and weather underground streams as well.
Wow.
So there's definitely the underground component is the water, and the leys seem to relate more to heavenly energy.
I mean, they were so attuned to like these spiritual energies like, and placement, and now they just put these churches, temples, whatever, wherever.
To some extent,
I think the new cathedral, I mean, it's not new, but the one downtown that they built, the old one had so much energy. I mean, it was so, because we went and dowsed it. This one, like, you know, they're like cracks every 3 feet. You're just looking at grid cracks, and, you know, and it's not that old.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I was, you know, I've had some of this and like, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a few stories like that. There's a famous little chapel in Portugal that's been a great centre of pilgrimage for hundreds of years. And so a benefactor who wanted lots of planning permission to build lots of new high-rises along the coast paid for a whole new, much bigger chapel just beside the old one that my sources tell me was completely devoid of any holiness or energy whatsoever, and those who knew went round the back to the little old chapel, and that's where they got
the difference between tourists and pilgrims.
Yeah.
So I always think, so when you're, so now like when you're out looking, like people are having problems set and you go to assess it, like what do? Like they're having, you know, health problems or things are breaking down in the house, and like from a geomantic point of view, what do you do?
Yeah, I start by asking questions about all the various problems they've encountered since they moved into that house, or since things started to go wrong. Ask them about their luck, ask them about their health, ask them about any other particular issues. Some of them will lead with health problems, some of them will lead with ghost problems. Some of them will lead with bad luck problems. So I'll start by asking questions and ask them if there's any particular areas of the house they feel particularly uncomfortable. And if it's health related, I'll get them to take me to the beds of anyone involved in bad health and first check in the house with my dowsing rods what's going on under that bed. And I'm looking primarily for any lays that are running distressed, any underground water veins that are running distressed, any geological faults, any mineral deposits underneath, and any negative geopathogenic grid crossing points as well. I'll then actually go all the way around the outside of the house, identifying any lines running through the house, and just use my dowsing rods to find me a series of useful earth acupuncture points. Usually I'll use one wand for each line, be it an underground water vein, and go through an acupuncture protocol. As I was first taught earth acupuncture about a good 45 years ago now, by an American dowser actually called Sig Longren.
Oh, I know. I've heard him speak, yeah.
At that point, a lot of dowsers were hammering in lengths of rebar and lengths of steel and leaving them there to provide a kind of permanent fix. And then in the 1980s, there was in Britain certainly a crossover of acupuncture skills with dowsing skills came in. And we started to realize that if you left a lump of iron in too long, it would become a thorn in the flesh of the earth. And we were better off going through a therapeutic cycle and coming out the other side. So fundamentally, I'm looking at releasing landscape trauma. So witnessing and releasing landscape trauma to restore the healthy free flow of energy along that particular earth energy current. So it's very much the same model as human acupuncture.
Yeah, because you are an acupuncturist, so.
yeah. So I was able to, my first training was actually a geography degree, and it was on a field trip to Avebury one day. It was a 19-year-old, and I started asking why would our Neolithic ancients have bothered to go to this huge effort to build the giant banks and ditch and the various standing stones? And that's what led me into reading some of the books that were coming out in the 60s and 70s on geomancy, writers like John Michel and Paul Devereux.
Did you know Slim Sperling?
No, I've heard of him.
Yeah, because he was always around when I was at the dowsing places, and he was so into his rebar, but you know, as the stake. But now I see, you know, you're putting that in. Whoops, this thing came in front of you. This it just rusts.
Yeah, it rusts. It goes in, and iron offends the fairies.
And what does it do?
No, iron offends the fairies.
Oh, okay.
Traditionally, so to use iron or steel is actually a bit offensive to the elemental realms.
Oh, okay.
So although I was first taught to hammer in a length of iron, the first time I did a job myself, my intuition was very much to use wood instead.
Yeah.
And I've evolved working with tree spirits and cutting wooden wands that I use as my earth acupuncture set.
And do you use copper at all? Is copper bad? Because some people take their copper dowsing rod and put it in. Do you know?
Yeah. I don't think it's bad. It's not nearly as. I think it works. There has been a style I've encountered of putting a ring of copper rods in all the way around a property to set up a shielding field. But I find it kind of goes inert or furs up and becomes useless after a year or so.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you can use copper, certainly. I was always drawn to working with tree spirits, and so I use wooden wands that are about 2 or 3 feet long, convenient length for not having to bend too often.
So they're nice and long. And then what trees do you like the best for that?
Hardwood trees. I find fruit trees don't like to do the work. I work mainly nowadays. I work with oak and eucalyptus for water lines. Eucalyptus slightly randomly, but I've got some Australian heritage.
Because the oak attract. I mean, they always say it. Oak attracts lightning and all of that stuff. So it's
yeah. I'd say that oak is capable of withstanding geopathic stress better than most other trees.
Oh, okay.
And eucalyptus is another one like that. The hardwood, I've worked with holly and hawthorn and a number of other woods. The softwoods don't like it. Pines and firs don't like the work, and the fruitwoods don't like it.
But this is like, these are like long, like 3 feet, right?
I have a few 3 feet. Most of them are probably about 2 feet long.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're not too heavy to carry around in my bag, and I can find them in the long grass.
And then how long do you leave these?
When I first started out, I was leaving them in for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the early 90s, there was a good number of people focused around the Feng Shui Society in London who discovered one summer that suddenly jobs that had been taking us 2 hours were suddenly taking us about 40 or 50 minutes instead.
Oh.
It was as if some new overlighting angel had come into the spirit of the budding Earth Acupuncture industry to help us all out.
So you can just douse your time that you leave it, right?
Yeah, well, you can feel when it comes through,
Yeah.
when it's finished. And maybe there'll be omens, like suddenly there will be a wheeling of birds overhead, or the birds will start singing,
Yeah.
or a sense of relief will come to you and your
Okay.
you and your host's faces as you feel like things have cleared, and then you
Yeah.
can check. Then you can check with the dowsing rods: are we finished? Yes or no?
And you
But
usually have like good success with the people? Are they happy?
yeah, the feedback I've had is in a way probably what distinguishes me from being a useful geomancer to being a nutcase with a bag of sticks. Is the feedback I've had again and again that people's health get better.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's 6 centimeter esophageal tumor has suddenly disappeared on their next scan 3 weeks later. Had a few stories like that, but it was so in every case.
Yeah. Well, and then you've studied a lot of Feng Shui, so you also are coming at it,
Yeah,
combining that too.
yeah. I studied so all the interior design dimensions of Feng Shui.
Mm-hmm.
Are of course really useful part of a geomancer's toolkit, all the visible. And
Right.
then and I set out when I was studying Feng Shui to discover what there was in the Chinese tradition of the knowledge of the underground energies, what we know in Western dowsing,
Mm-hmm.
and discovered a whole corpus of tradition tucked away called the mysterious underground energies. And even, you know, the Feng Shui term sha
Yeah.
to mean any hostile, toxic environmental threat.
Mm-hmm.
The root ideogram, the Chinese ideogram for sha, represents 4 licks of flame below the ground surface, with a character above meaning decapitation or slaying or killing chi.
Wow.
So it's a killing fire force coming from beneath the ground. So the roots of the word sha is actually the geopathic stress that we know as dowsers.
I got an I Ching, I forgot who did it, but he went back and used all the original ideograms, you know, and the little, and they're just they're not like like the Chinese use now. They're totally different.
Yeah, the
I think you call them pictograms or whatever.
pictograms. Yeah, I think you're talking about Wu Jingyan, who's my favorite.
Yeah,
My favorite.
exactly. It's just so different than all the other I Ching that you see.
Yeah. So having discovered that this is there tucked away in the roots of the Feng Shui tradition as well, I then discovered little snippets like some Feng Shui masters still will use the trembling, wobbling movements of the needle in the center of the lobulin to divine the state of the earth energies underneath.
But what I found is now with all this electromagnetic pollution around, that's, you know, if you can't take any of that in a high rise or anything, it just goes nuts because the whole building's steel. You know, it's like
no, definitely. And also you can't get an accurate compass bearing even on a simple detached house until you've cleaned up the geopathic stress.
And if you just show people what's happening to the compass and show them you're living there, you know what I mean? It's like, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
but so it's to your blood and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. In my consulting, if I am going to use a low pad and start doing directionology and placement and so on, I'll always wait until the Earth Acupunctures come to a point of resolution and I can get much more accurate compass bearings at that point.
Yeah. Now I know when I was looking at your things, the fountain, I looked and I went, oh, the fountain organization by Colin Bloy. And I used to read all of his stuff, and then I signed up and became a member of the Fountain organization. And then with 2 other friends, we formed this group. It was pretty big. And then we would go once a month to different water places around LA. and we had little bottles, and we would get what we would do our meditation and get water at that site. Then we would meditate with it all month and then go to the next site, dump it in and take water there. So we were circulating it around the city. It was a really nice, ritual. Yeah.
Yeah. Colin Bly was an early mentor of mine. He was the first in Britain in the early 80s to go beyond the academic lay hunting into saying, actually, we can work with these therapeutically as well.
Right.
I encountered.
Well, you have a thing where, so he did his first ceremony at what fountain is that in England?
The Old Steam Fountain in Brighton, in the centre of Brighton.
Okay.
And the first meditation where he was co-opting all the various groups of spiritual healers around Brighton and further afield to just put some geomantic focus into the Old Steam as a kind of key point. And if we could get that one clearing and moving and getting sweet, then the hope was that it would clean up all sorts of social problems in Brighton. And certainly the feedback over the next few years was it was definitely successful. One of the very early hopes was that it would stop the annual Mods and Rockers violence that would happen every summertime in one weekend in Brighton. And the year that we started doing it, mysteriously the Mods and Rockers didn't come to Brighton that year.
Wow.
They went along to another seaside town further along the coast and beat the hell out of that for the weekend instead.
Wow. So, I mean, did people keep up? Because I mean, ours just kind of dissipated the way things do, but have people kept up with that, doing different?
To some extent, after Colin died, Fountain International lost a lot of impetus, but there are still groups doing it. Fountain International is still alive in England. We did 4 years ago a whole revisiting the Old Steam Fountain in Brighton meditation as a kind of collaborative scheme between Fountain International and the Indigo Umbrella and various other New Age groups. And I went along and used Colin Bly and Hamish Miller's original dowsing protocols to count the number of bands within the lays before and after the meditation and other observational skills. There's an article on our website about our revisiting. Gave it a great big oomph. And the upshot of that is 3 years later, Brighton Council finished a great big refurbishment of the fountain and all the benches around it. And it was looking rather sad and derelict, but it's
well, that was a good one.
Revived.
What did you call them? The Mods and Rockers, or what? Did they come back?
No, the Mods and Rockers have faded out as a cultural phenomenon now.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
They didn't come back to Brighton after that. They chose other seaside towns.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had a few experiences. Once I was asked by a client who lived in a flat overlooking a car park in Rochester, where there was fights and knifings going on every Friday and Saturday night, if I could clean up all the earth energies in that car park. So I went along and did that using my Earth Acupuncture styles. And the report was that the following weekend, they mysteriously didn't gather in that car park anymore. They went up the other end of Rochester High Street instead.
Wow, that's a major victory.
Yeah. So the troublemakers had just found the next sweetest spot by their standards to go and hang.
Wow. I mean, the US could use this the way all these cities are crumbling, like really needs some kind of help, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I have a fundamental vision that maintaining the spiritual hygiene of the world's Earth Energy Network is fundamental to having a healthy society, healthy human society. And one could see that in the old days, the mosque or the synagogue or the church was centered on the local geomantic power spot, and the quality of ceremony and quality of meditation and prayer and so on going on there would feed not just into the humans attending, but would also help to keep the earth energies sweet. And especially in relation to sound, so the ringing of church bells and the singing of hymns and music and so on, and especially sacred music.
Because the bells just clear the air. I mean, it's just like,
exactly.
I mean, it's just, and then all of these Like I have one church with bells like 3 blocks away. Then all the neighbors complained.
Uh-huh.
It was annoying them. Like,
Yeah, no, they're bringing the lines clean.
exactly.
There's even a tradition, an old tradition here, that if there's a thunderstorm on its way, you quickly go and ring the church bell. And if you do that, then lightning won't strike in your parish. It'll strike in the next parish where we didn't bother to ring their church bell. And because lightning's attracted to geopathic stress hotspots, crossing spots, well, one can see the mechanism.
Hey, well, this has been a good one, and it's been an hour. I can't believe it, but
Okay,
so,
one other thing I forgot to say earlier is U-wands are the ones that have become my favorite for working with lays.
oh, you.
U-wands, yeah. So if
Okay.
I'm needling a lay, I will use 3 U-wands, one on the midline and one each on the male and female currents. And
Oh,
again,
okay.
using dowsing rods to define a useful point.
Oh, I had one other thing I wanted to ask you. Do you do map dowsing at all, or all of yours is like on site?
No, I do map dowsing, and I do increasingly since lockdown. I do remote clearing, usually using Google Earth. So,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
and I found that remote clearing can do about half the job.
Yeah.
That's my experience. I consider that when I'm old and wise, I might be able to do the whole job from my armchair. But
I think, just with all of so much remote stuff for all the healers, the tarot reader, all of these people, everybody doing everything, that it isn't as powerful as when it's in person.
No, exactly.
And so that's what, it's like it loses it.
It's also been my experience going along to places that have had remote work done first. The spirit disturbances have all been sorted out. They're relatively easy to do remotely. But spirit could do everything if it could. There's no substitute for being a physical incarnate presence on the site, and that's to be able to clear the other half, as well as obviously pick up any Feng Shui design issues that are impacting on the problem as well.
Right, you can to do remote Feng Shui like that is like, I do it, and if I have to have a whole bunch of pictures and and now with the cell phone, they can walk you through, and you know what I mean? You can get the idea.
Yeah.
So So thank you, Richard. This was great, and it just flew by.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. It's been lovely.
I'm so happy you agreed to do this. So.